The call came just as the nurse was adjusting my four. "Miss Harper, you have family waiting in the lobby." I couldn't imagine who would be visiting at 10 p.m. on a Tuesday. I'd only been admitted to St. Mary's 3 days ago after collapsing at work from what turned out to be severe pneumonia and dehydration. The doctors were monitoring me closely because of my compromised immune system, a souvenir from the chemotherapy treatments I'd completed 6 months ago. "Send them in," I said, trying to straighten my tangled hair with my fingers. When my cousin James walked through the door instead of my expected aunt, his expression told me something was very wrong. "Charlotte," he said, his voice tight as he crossed to my bedside. "I need to show you something, and I need you to try to stay calm." He pulled out his phone and handed it to me. On the screen was a real estate listing for a charming craftsman home with a wraparound porch and original hardwood floors. The address made my heart drop: 1847 Maple Avenue. My house. The home I'd shared with Daniel until his death last year. The home we'd spent 5 years renovating together, installing each floorboard, painting each wall, selecting each fixture with careful deliberation. "What is this?" My voice was barely audible. "I didn't list my house." "I know," James said, pulling up a chair. "Aunt Vivian did." The monitor beside me registered my spike in heart rate as James took my hand. "Don't worry. I've already handled it. The listing's been taken down." As both my cousin and a real estate attorney, James had always looked out for me, especially after Daniel's sudden death. "But there's more you need to know." I stared at him, unable to process the betrayal I was feeling. Aunt Vivian had been my mother's sister, and since Mom's death when I was 20, she'd been the closest thing to a parent I had. She'd helped arrange Daniel's funeral when I was too grief-stricken to function. She'd stayed with me for 2 weeks afterward, cooking meals I couldn't eat and fielding calls I couldn't take. And now she had tried to sell my home without my knowledge while I lay in a hospital bed fighting to breathe. Why would she do this? I asked, the pulse oximeter on my finger registering my distress with shrill beeps. James looked at the door, his expression grim. "She's here. So is Uncle Robert. They want to talk to you." He squeezed my hand. "I won't leave your side." When Aunt Vivian swept into the room in her designer coat with Uncle Robert trailing behind, I could see she'd been crying. Her makeup was immaculate as always, but her eyes were red-rimmed. She carried a large gift bag and an arrangement of lilies that immediately made my nose itch. "Charlotte, darling," she said, setting down the flowers and rushing to my side opposite James. "How are you feeling? Why didn't you call us when you were admitted? We had to hear from Carol at church that you were here." She reached for my hand, but I pulled away. "Why did you list my house for sale?" I asked, my voice stronger than I expected. The room went silent except for the steady beep of my heart monitor. Uncle Robert shifted uncomfortably near the door. Aunt Vivian's face transformed from concern to what she probably thought was compassionate determination. "Sweetheart, it's been over a year since Daniel passed. Living in that house is keeping you trapped in grief. Look at you, hospitalized from exhaustion and not taking care of yourself." She brushed hair from my forehead in a gesture that once would have comforted me but now made my skin crawl. "You need a fresh start. A smaller place with no maintenance. No memories haunting you every time you walk in the door." "Those memories are all I have left," I said, tears welling in my eyes. "And that house is mine. You had no right." "I'm your medical proxy," she said, as if that explained everything. "After your cancer treatments last year, remember? You never changed it. And I was acting in your best interest. Being my medical proxy doesn't give you the right to sell my property," I said, looking to James for confirmation. "Absolutely not," he agreed, his attorney voice taking over. "What you did was completely unauthorized and potentially illegal, Aunt Vivian." Aunt Vivian's face hardened. She's not thinking clearly. She hasn't been since Daniel died. That house is draining her financially and emotionally. She turned to me, her voice softening artificially. "Darling, I already have 2 offers sight unseen. Over asking price. You could move into that lovely condo building near us. We could take care of you." The realization hit me like a physical blow. "How long has the listing been up?" I asked James. 3 days, he answered. "Since the day you were admitted." The timing wasn't coincidental. Aunt Vivian had waited until I was literally unable to object, then moved with stunning efficiency. There was something more here, something she wasn't saying. "The truth, Aunt Vivian," I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite the fury and betrayal coursing through me. "Why now? Why the rush to get me out of my home?" Uncle Robert cleared his throat. "Vivian, just tell her." She shot him a withering look before turning back to me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Berkshire Development made an offer on your entire block. They're building luxury condominiums. The neighbors have all agreed to sell. You're the last holdout, and frankly, you're preventing everyone from getting the best price. Mrs. Klein next door could really use that money for her retirement, and the Patels need it for their son's college tuition." The manipulation was so transparent it would have been laughable if it weren't so devastating. She was trying to make me feel guilty for keeping my own home, as if I were personally responsible for my neighbors' financial futures. "And what do you get out of this?" I asked. "Why do you care if I sell or not?" The silence that followed my question was answer enough. James leaned forward. "Aunt Vivian is a silent investor in Berkshire Development. She stands to make a substantial profit if the project goes through." The betrayal cut so deep I could barely breathe. As I gasped for air, the monitor started beeping more urgently, and a nurse rushed in. "Everyone needs to leave," she said firmly, checking my oxygen levels. "Miss Harper needs rest." "I'm staying," James said, standing his ground. "I'm her legal counsel." The nurse looked to me, and I nodded, grateful for his solidarity. As Aunt Vivian and Uncle Robert were ushered out, my aunt turned back. "Charlotte, you're being unreasonable. That house is killing you. Let it go, like you need to let Daniel go." The nurse practically pushed her out the door at that point, but the damage was done. I collapsed back against the pillows, tears streaming down my face. The idea that I could ever let Daniel go was absurd. How do you let go of half your soul? How do you move on when the future you planned together is shattered beyond recognition? James sat quietly while I cried, simply offering his presence until I had calmed enough to speak. "What happens now?" I asked, wiping my face with the scratchy hospital tissue. "Now we fight," he said, his expression determined. "First, we're changing your medical proxy immediately. I've brought the paperwork." He pulled documents from his briefcase. "Second, I've already filed an injunction preventing any real estate transactions involving your property without your explicit, notarized consent." He hesitated before continuing. "And third, we need to discuss the fact that Aunt Vivian may have accessed your financial records. There are some irregularities I've noticed." My exhaustion was becoming overwhelming, but panic kept me alert. "What irregularities?" "Let's talk about it tomorrow when you've rested," he said, squeezing my hand. "Nothing that can't be fixed. Just know that I'm handling it and your house is safe." As I drifted toward sleep, comforted slightly by James's presence, I couldn't help but wonder how I'd face Aunt Vivian again, the woman who had held me as I sobbed at Daniel's funeral, who had promised to always protect me, and who had now betrayed me so completely for financial gain. The next morning, I awoke to find James asleep in the chair beside my bed, his suit wrinkled and his laptop open on the small hospital table. Whatever irregularities he'd discovered had clearly kept him working through the night. Before I could wake him, Dr. Patel entered to check my progress. "Good news, Miss Harper," she said after listening to my lungs. "The antibiotics are working. Your oxygen levels are much improved. If this continues, we might release you in a couple of days." "Thank you," I said, relief washing over me. While the hospital had been a temporary sanctuary from Aunt Vivian's machinations, I desperately wanted to go home, my real home, with its creaky third stair and the back garden Daniel had designed. James stirred and sat up, immediately alert despite his obvious exhaustion. "What did I miss?" "Charlotte's improving," Dr. Patel said with a smile. "But she needs to avoid stress." She looked pointedly at the stack of legal documents beside James's laptop. "Whatever that is, it can wait." "It really can't," I said, more firmly than I'd spoken in days. "My aunt tried to sell my house without my permission while I was in here. Apparently, she's also done something with my finances." Dr. Patel's professional demeanor slipped for a moment, revealing genuine shock. I see. Well, try to stay calm while dealing with it. Stress impairs immune function. She made some notes in my chart. I'll have the nurse bring your medication. And perhaps a mild anti-anxiety medication might be appropriate under the circumstances? I nodded gratefully, and once she left, James immediately moved to sit on the edge of my bed. Let me explain what I found, he said, opening his laptop. Aunt Vivian has been monitoring your bank accounts. I'm not sure how she got access, possibly from when she helped with Daniel's funeral arrangements, but she's been keeping track of every payment, every bill. He turned the screen so I could see spreadsheets with my financial information meticulously documented. She's been building a case that you're financially unstable, presumably to strengthen her argument that you should sell the house. She's even documented late payments on your property taxes and mortgage. I frowned, but I'm not late on those payments. They're on auto-pay from the joint account. Daniel had been obsessively organized about our finances. Even after his death, the systems he'd set up continued to run smoothly. Exactly, James said grimly. Which is why I checked further. Someone changed the payment dates in your bank's online system. Payments were rescheduled to go out after the due dates, triggering late fees. Not enough to cause default, but enough to create a pattern of financial irresponsibility. The room seemed to tilt around me. Are you saying she deliberately made me late on payments to force me to sell my house? That's what it looks like. I've already contacted the bank to investigate unauthorized access to your accounts. And I've corrected the payment schedules. He ran a hand through his disheveled hair. Charlotte, there's something else. I found emails between Aunt Vivian and a psychiatrist she consulted about having you evaluated for depression-induced decision impairment. She was trying to have me declared incompetent? The betrayal deepened, carving out a hollow in my chest that echoed with each heartbeat. She didn't get that far, James assured me. But she was laying groundwork. Using your history of grief and your recent health issues to build a narrative that you're unable to make sound decisions. I closed my eyes, overwhelmed by the calculated nature of her betrayal. It wasn't just opportunistic, taking advantage of my hospitalization. It was methodical, planned over months. Why does she want this development deal so badly that she'd do this to me? I asked, voicing the question that had been haunting me since last night. James hesitated. Uncle Robert's business is failing. They remortgaged their house last year. This development deal would solve their financial problems completely. They'd make enough to pay off their debts and maintain their lifestyle. The revelation should have evoked sympathy, but all I felt was cold anger. Financial troubles didn't justify betraying family. They didn't excuse trying to manipulate me out of the home that held my most precious memories of Daniel. A gentle knock interrupted us. My nurse, Elena, entered with a medication cup and water. You have more visitors, she said after I'd swallowed the pills. But I told them they need to wait until you're ready. No stress, doctor's orders. Who is it? I asked, though I already knew. Your aunt and uncle again, plus an older gentleman who says he's your father-in-law? My heart leaped. Jack is here. Daniel's father had been living in Arizona since retiring 5 years ago. We kept in touch through weekly calls, but I hadn't seen him in person since Daniel's funeral. Please, send him in. Just him for now. When Jack Harper entered my hospital room, his familiar weathered face and kind eyes brought fresh tears to mine. At 72, he moved more slowly than he once had, but his presence still filled the room with warmth and quiet strength, so like Daniel that it made my heart ache. Charlotte, he said, crossing to embrace me carefully, mindful of the 4 in my arm. Why didn't you call me? I didn't want to worry you, I said, clinging to him longer than I normally would. It's just pneumonia. I'll be fine. He pulled back, studying my face with the directness that had always characterized him. James called me last night. Told me what Vivian tried to do. His jaw tightened. Is it true? I nodded, unable to form words around the lump in my throat. Jack turned to James. Did you tell her about the trust? James shook his head. I was getting to that. What trust? I asked, looking between them. Jack sat on the edge of my bed, taking my hand in his calloused one. When Daniel's mother died, we set up trusts for both our boys. Daniel's activated upon his death. The house is part of that trust, Charlotte. Vivian can't sell it even if she somehow got you to agree. The trust specifically states that the property remains yours for as long as you wish to live there. If you choose to sell, the proceeds would be divided half to you, half to a foundation for cancer research that Daniel specified. Fresh tears spilled down my cheeks. Even in death, Daniel was protecting me, protecting our home. Vivian knows this, Jack continued, his gentle voice hardening. I reminded her at the funeral when she started talking about you selling the house and moving on. She knows, Charlotte. The medication was making it harder to stay angry, but the hurt remained. She was willing to violate Daniel's last wishes for money? Apparently so, Jack said grimly. Which is why I'm here. I've been thinking of moving back from Arizona anyway. The heat's not good for my arthritis, and I miss my grandkids. James tells me the guest house in your backyard is just sitting empty. The guest house was actually a renovated carriage house that Daniel and I had planned to convert into a home office and art studio. After his death, I'd lacked the energy or motivation to complete the project. You want to live in the carriage house? I asked, trying to process this unexpected development. If you'll have me, Jack said. I can finish the renovations. You know I taught Daniel everything he knew about carpentry. And I'd be close enough to help if you need anything, but not so close we'd be in each other's business all the time. The offer brought the first genuine smile to my face since my hospitalization. Jack had always respected my independence while offering support when needed, a trait he'd passed to his son. Having him nearby would be comforting, not intrusive. I'd like that, I said softly. James cleared his throat. There's still the matter of Aunt Vivian. She and Uncle Robert are waiting outside, and from what the nurse said, they're getting impatient. Jack's expression hardened. Let them wait. Charlotte needs to decide how she wants to handle this. The weight of the decision pressed on me. Part of me wanted to cut Aunt Vivian out of my life completely after such a profound betrayal. Yet another part recognized that she was the last connection to my mother, the woman who had helped raise me after Mom died. I need to confront her, I said finally. I need to hear her admit what she did and why. Then I can decide if there's any relationship worth salvaging. James nodded. I'll be right here. We both will. Send them in, I told him, sitting up straighter and steeling myself for the confrontation. When Aunt Vivian and Uncle Robert entered, they were clearly surprised to find Jack there. My aunt recovered quickly, her social smile sliding into place as she approached the bed. Charlotte, you're looking better today, she said, attempting to take my hand. I pulled away. Let's not pretend everything is normal, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I know what you did. I know about the unauthorized listing, the tampering with my bank accounts, and your attempts to have me declared mentally incompetent. Aunt Vivian's face paled, but she quickly rallied. I was only trying to help you. That house is a financial burden you don't need while recovering from cancer and now pneumonia. You're making yourself sick trying to maintain it. The house is part of Daniel's trust, I said, watching her reaction carefully. You knew that. A flicker of something guilt, perhaps, or simply annoyance at being caught, crossed her face before she composed herself. Trusts can be broken if they're not in the beneficiary's best interest. Jack leaned forward. Not this one, Vivian. I made sure of that. Uncle Robert, who had been silent until now, stepped forward. Viv, just tell her the truth. This has gone too far. Aunt Vivian shot him a warning glance, but he continued. We're in financial trouble, Charlotte. My business is failing. The development deal is our way out, but it can't go forward without your property. Vivian thought, we thought, if we could convince you it was for your own good. So you manipulated me, I said, the hurt evident in my voice. You sabotaged my finances. You tried to sell my home while I was too sick to object. You betrayed my trust completely for money. It wasn't just about money. Aunt Vivian insisted, tears welling in her eyes. I genuinely believe you'd be happier somewhere else. Somewhere without all those painful memories of Daniel. Somewhere you could truly start fresh. She reached for my hand again, and this time I didn't pull away, too exhausted by the confrontation. Charlotte, I love you like a daughter. Everything I did, misguided as it was, came from that love. I studied her face, searching for the truth in her words. There was genuine emotion there, but also calculation. She believed what she was saying, at least partially, but it didn't excuse her actions. I need time, I said finally. Time to decide if I can ever trust you again. For now, I want you to leave. Both of you. I looked directly at my aunt. And I want your key to my house back. Her face crumpled. Charlotte, please. The key, Aunt Vivian. Now. With trembling hands, she opened her purse and removed a key from her key ring. As she placed it on my bedside table, she whispered, I'm sorry. I truly am. I know, I said, suddenly too tired to maintain my anger. But that doesn't fix what you broke. After they left, the room fell silent except for the steady beep of the heart monitor. James looked at his watch. I need to file some paperwork to ensure the injunction stays in place. Will you be okay if I step out for a couple of hours? I nodded, grateful for his help but eager for some time alone with Jack. After James left, Daniel's father moved to sit in the chair beside my bed. You handled that well, he said, pride evident in his voice. I don't know what to do about her, I admitted. Part of me understands her desperation if they're really in financial trouble. But the way she went about it. I trailed off, unable to articulate the depth of the betrayal I felt. You don't have to decide anything right now, Jack said gently. Focus on getting better. The rest will sort itself out. We sat in comfortable silence for a while before I asked the question that had been nagging at me. Do you think I should move? Start fresh somewhere without all the memories. Jack considered my question with the thoughtfulness I'd always appreciated in him. After Margaret died, he said, referring to Daniel's mother, everyone told me to sell the house. Said it would be easier to move on without all the reminders. But I found those reminders comforting. Her garden, the kitchen where she'd cook Sunday dinners, the mark on the wall where we measured the boy's growth, they kept her presence alive for me. He squeezed my hand. But that was my choice. Yours might be different, and that's okay. The important thing is that it should be your choice, not someone else's. Tears slid down my cheeks. I'm not ready to leave yet. Maybe someday, but not now. Every corner of that house holds a piece of Daniel, of us together. I'm not ready to let that go. Then don't, Jack said simply. And don't let anyone make you feel guilty for holding onto what matters to you. 2 days later, I was discharged from the hospital with strict instructions to rest and continue my course of antibiotics. Jack insisted on staying at a hotel near my house until the carriage house renovations were complete, despite my offer to let him use the guest room. You need space to recover, he said, not a house guest to worry about. James had handled all the legal fallout from Aunt Vivian's actions. My bank accounts were secured with new passwords and additional verification steps. The property was legally protected from any unauthorized sales, and Aunt Vivian's access to my medical information had been completely revoked. As Jack drove me home, I felt a mixture of anxiety and anticipation. I hadn't been away from the house for this long since Daniel's death. What would it feel like to walk through that door without him again? Would Aunt Vivian's words about being trapped in grief echo too loudly in those familiar rooms? When we pulled into the driveway, I was surprised to see several cars parked along the street. What's going on? I asked Jack, who looked suspiciously unsurprised. A little welcome home committee, he said with a small smile. Nothing too overwhelming, I promise. As we approached the front door, it swung open to reveal Elena, my hospital nurse, dressed in casual clothes rather than scrubs. Surprise, she said with a warm smile. Don't worry, this isn't a party. Just a few people who wanted to help. Inside, I found James directing a small group of people I recognized as my neighbors. Mrs. Klein was arranging flowers in the kitchen. Mr. Patel and his teenage son were setting up a meal train calendar on my laptop. 2 younger women I didn't recognize were cleaning the already spotless living room. What is all this? I asked, overwhelmed by the unexpected support. James approached with a clipboard. After what happened with Aunt Vivian, I thought you might appreciate knowing who your real allies are. He gestured to the neighbors. When they heard about the development deal and how your aunt tried to force you out, they were outraged. Turns out, most of them don't want to sell either. They felt pressured. Mrs. Klein abandoned her flowers to embrace me gently. Your aunt came to each of us, told us you had agreed to sell, and that we were holding up progress by not joining in. We had no idea she was lying. We formed a neighborhood coalition, Mr. Patel added proudly, to fight the development together. Your cousin has been helping us pro bono. James shrugged modestly when I looked at him in surprise. Just doing my job. And these ladies? I asked, indicating the unfamiliar women cleaning my living room. From the cancer support group you attended last year, Jack explained. They called the hospital when you missed the meeting. When I mentioned you were being discharged today, they insisted on helping. One of the women approached, introducing herself as Tasha. We take care of our own, she said simply. Caroline over there brought meals for the freezer. I'm on light cleaning duty, and we've arranged a rotation to check in on you until you're back on your feet. Tears welled in my eyes at their kindness. For months after Daniel's death, I'd felt utterly alone despite Aunt Vivian's presence. I'd withdrawn from friends, stopped attending the support group, convinced that no one could possibly understand the depth of my loss. Yet here were people, some I barely knew, rallying around me when I needed help most. Thank you, I whispered, my voice breaking. I don't know what to say. You don't need to say anything, Elena assured me. Just let us help. And maybe, when you're feeling better, you can come back to group? We've missed you. As the afternoon progressed, I sat in Daniel's favorite armchair, watching this improvised community move around my home. They respected my space, worked quietly when they saw my energy flagging, and left by early evening with promises to check in tomorrow. Each one hugged me before leaving, anchoring me to the present when grief threatened to pull me back into the past. When only Jack remained, I finally allowed myself to fully relax. I didn't know I had so many people in my corner, I admitted. Daniel would be pleased, Jack said, settling into the couch across from me. He always worried about you being alone if anything happened to him. It's why he made me promise to look out for you. I reached for the framed photo of Daniel on the side table, taken on our last vacation together, his smile radiant despite the cancer that had already begun its silent work inside him. I miss him every day, I said softly. But today, for the first time since he died, I didn't feel like I was drowning in that missing. Jack nodded in understanding. The grief doesn't go away. You just build life around it. Make room for it without letting it consume everything. As twilight softened the light streaming through the windows Daniel and I had restored together, I felt something shift inside me. This house wasn't a mausoleum to my grief as Aunt Vivian had claimed. It was the foundation upon which I could build whatever came next. Each room held memories, yes, but they were memories I cherished, not ones I needed to escape. I think I'm exactly where I need to be, I said, running my hand along the arm of Daniel's chair. Right here. Home. 2 weeks later, my strength had largely returned. The pneumonia had cleared, and my follow-up with my oncologist confirmed I remained in remission. Jack had made remarkable progress on the carriage house, transforming it from an empty shell into a cozy living space with his skilled hands. Watching him work was sometimes painfully reminiscent of Daniel, but more often comforting, a continuation of something precious rather than a reminder of loss. I'd received numerous texts and a tearful voicemail from Aunt Vivian, but I wasn't ready to respond. James kept me updated on Uncle Robert's business situation, which had apparently stabilized somewhat after they secured a small business loan. The development deal had fallen through when the neighborhood coalition successfully petitioned the city council to reject the zoning change Berkshire development needed. One sunny afternoon, as I was planting bulbs in the garden Daniel had designed, something I'd never had the heart to do after his death, I heard the gate open. I turned to find Aunt Vivian standing uncertainly at the garden entrance, looking smaller and older than I remembered. The neighbors said you were back here, she said, her voice uncharacteristically hesitant. I should have called first. I sat back on my heels, gardening trowel still in hand. Probably. She twisted her wedding ring nervously. You're looking well. Better than at the hospital. I'm feeling better, I acknowledged, neither inviting her closer nor asking her to leave. The silence stretched between us, filled with unspoken hurt and complicated history. Finally, she took a tentative step forward. I've come to apologize. Properly this time. What I did was unforgivable. I betrayed your trust. I manipulated you when you were vulnerable. Her composure cracked. I convinced myself I was helping you, but I was really helping myself. I'm so deeply sorry, Charlotte. I studied her face, searching for the sincerity I needed to see. It was there, along with genuine remorse that softened my resolve somewhat. You hurt me, I said simply. Not just by what you did, but by what it revealed about how you see me. As someone incapable of making her own decisions. As someone whose grief makes her incompetent. That's not, she began, then stopped herself. No, you're right. I did see your grief as something to fix rather than respecting it as part of who you are now. She gestured to the garden around us. I saw you clinging to this place as unhealthy when really you were honoring Daniel and the life you built together. Her insight surprised me. What changed your perspective? Robert, she admitted. He was furious with me when he realized how far I'd gone. He made me see that I wasn't respecting your choices. She paused. And Jack invited me to see the carriage house renovations. Seeing how you're making space for new connections while keeping Daniel's memory alive, it helped me understand. I wasn't ready to forgive her completely, but I recognized the courage it took for her to come here, to face me after what she'd done. It's going to take time, I said honestly. To rebuild trust. If that's even possible. I understand, she said, tears spilling onto her cheeks. I'll wait. However long it takes. You're the closest thing to a daughter I have, Charlotte. I can't lose you too. I turned back to my bulb planting, considering her words as I carefully placed another tulip in the earth. Daniel had loved spring flowers, their persistence in pushing through frozen ground to reach the light. Their refusal to stay buried. These will bloom in April, I said, not looking up. Daniel's favorites. You could come see them if you want. It was a small opening, not forgiveness, but a possibility. A bulb of potential planted in soil that had once seemed too damaged to nurture new growth. I'd like that, Aunt Vivian said softly. As she left, I continued planting in the fading afternoon light, my hands in the soil Daniel had once tended. The grief was still there, a permanent resident in my heart. But it had companionship now, determination, hope, and the knowledge that I was exactly where I belonged. In the home that held my past and would shelter my future, whatever form it might take. The house Daniel and I had loved back to life would continue to be my sanctuary, not my prison. And in its walls and gardens and wooden floors, I would find not just echoes of what I had lost, but foundations for what might still be possible.